Welcome to Sleepless History, where we explore the past in soothing detail to help you drift into peaceful sleep. Tonight, we embark on a gentle journey through the spiritual landscapes of ancient civilizations, exploring the gods, faiths, and beliefs that shaped human consciousness for thousands of years. In this episode, we will wander through the temples of ancient Rome, climb the slopes of Mount Olympus with the Greeks, traverse the spiritual rivers of China, visit the pyramids of Egypt, and explore the divine realms of Mesopotamia, India, and the Americas. We will move slowly through these ancient worlds, examining how humanity's relationship with the divine evolved, how these belief systems shaped societies, and how their echoes still resonate in our modern world. So settle into a comfortable position, close your eyes if you wish, and let us begin our tranquil exploration of the divine in the ancient world. If you enjoy this video or learn something new, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It helps this channel more than you may think. Chapter 1. The Mesopotamian Cradle. Our journey begins in Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, where some of humanity's earliest organized religions took root more than 5,000 years ago. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers carved fertile valleys through what is now modern Iraq, and in these valleys the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians built civilizations that would worship gods for millennia. The Mesopotamian pantheon was vast and complex, with thousands of deities governing every aspect of existence. At the top of this divine hierarchy stood the sky god Anu, whose name meant simply heaven. Anu was considered the father of the gods, though he gradually receded from active involvement in worldly affairs, becoming more of a distant, almost abstract concept of divine authority. Beneath Anu, in the cosmic order, was Enlil, the god of wind, air, and storms. Enlil held tremendous power in the Mesopotamian cosmos. He was the one who could grant kingship to mortal rulers, and his temple in the city of Nippur was considered the religious center of Sumer. The Mesopotamians believed that Enlil had separated heaven from earth at the beginning of time, creating the space in which humanity could exist. His moods were unpredictable, like the storms he commanded, and he could bring both devastating floods and life-giving rains. Enki, also known as Ea in later periods, was the god of wisdom, fresh water, and creation. He dwelt in the Abzu, the underground ocean of fresh water that the Mesopotamians believed existed beneath the earth. Enki was seen as a friend to humanity, often intervening to save people from the harsher decisions of other gods. In the famous Epic of Gilgamesh, and in earlier flood myths, it is Enki who warns the hero Utnapishtim about the coming deluge, instructing him to build a boat to save himself and the animals. The goddess Inanna, known as Ishtar in Akkadian, was among the most complex and widely worshipped deities in Mesopotamia. She was the goddess of love, beauty, sex, desire, fertility, war, justice, and political power. Her primary temple was in the city of Uruk, and she was celebrated in numerous hymns and poems. One of the most remarkable surviving texts from ancient Mesopotamia is The Descent of Inanna, which tells of the goddess's journey to the underworld, her death, and her eventual resurrection. This myth may have been connected to agricultural cycles, with Inanna's descent representing the barren season and her return symbolizing the return of fertility to the land. The Mesopotamians believed that humans had been created for a specific purpose, to serve the gods. According to the Atrahasis epic, the gods had grown weary of the labour required to maintain the world, so they created humans from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god to take over these tasks. This meant that religious observance was not merely a spiritual duty, but the very reason for human existence. Temples in Mesopotamian cities were not just places of worship, but massive economic centres. The ziggurat, a terraced pyramid structure, served as the dwelling place of the city's patron deity. The most famous ziggurat was likely the Etemenanke in Babylon, dedicated to the god Marduk, which may have inspired the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. These structures rose in stepped levels toward the sky, physically representing the connection between earth and heaven. Priests and priestesses held considerable power in Mesopotamian society. They maintained the temples, performed daily rituals to feed and clothe the statues of the gods, and interpreted omens. The Mesopotamians believed that the gods communicated their will through various signs: the patterns of oil on water, the shapes of animal livers, the movements of celestial bodies, and the content of dreams. Divination was not considered superstition, but a practical science for understanding the divine will. Marduk rose to prominence during the Babylonian period, particularly under Hammurabi, who ruled from approximately 1792 to 1750 BCE. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, elevated Marduk to the position of king of the gods. According to this myth, Marduk defeated Tiamat, the primordial goddess of the Salt Sea, in a cosmic battle. From Tiamat's corpse, Marduk created the heavens and the earth, establishing order from chaos. This myth served both religious and political purposes, legitimizing Babylon's dominance over other Mesopotamian cities and their gods. The concept of divine justice was central to Mesopotamian religion. The famous Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest written law codes, was presented as being given to the king by Shamash, the sun god and god of justice. The stele depicting Hammurabi receiving the laws from Shamash emphasized that earthly law was an extension of divine will, not merely a human invention. Death and the afterlife held a somber place in Mesopotamian belief. The underworld, known as Kur or Irkalla, was ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal and her consort Nergal. It was conceived as a dark, dusty place where the dead existed as shadows of their former selves, eating clay and dust. There was little distinction based on moral behaviour. Both the righteous and the wicked descended to this gloomy realm. The best one could hope for was to be remembered by the living, and to have descendants who would make offerings at one's grave. Despite this bleak view of death, the Mesopotamians developed elaborate funeral practices. The dead were buried with grave goods, including pottery, tools, and sometimes food and drink. Royal burials were particularly elaborate, as seen in the famous royal tombs of Ur, dating to around 2600 BCE, where attendants and animals were sometimes sacrificed to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. The religious worldview of Mesopotamia profoundly influenced later civilizations. When the Persians conquered Babylon in 539 BCE, they encountered and absorbed aspects of Mesopotamian religion. The biblical story of creation, the flood narrative, and various legal concepts show clear Mesopotamian influences transmitted through the period when the Jewish elite were exiled in Babylon during the 6th century BCE. The slow transition from polytheism toward monotheism in the ancient Near East would take centuries, but the theological concepts developed in Mesopotamia, particularly ideas about cosmic order, divine justice, and the relationship between earthly and heavenly authority, would echo through subsequent religious traditions. Chapter 2: Ancient Egypt and the Eternal. Along the Nile River, another great civilization developed a religious system that would endure for over 3,000 years. Ancient Egyptian religion was characterized by its stunning continuity, its elaborate mythology, and its profound focus on the afterlife and the eternal nature of existence. The Egyptian pantheon was vast and fluid, with gods often merging or being identified with one another. This theological flexibility allowed Egyptian religion to adapt and endure through dramatic political and social changes. Gods could be represented in fully human form, as animals, or as hybrid beings combining human and animal features. Ra, the sun god, held a central position in Egyptian theology. Each day, Ra was believed to travel across the sky in his solar bark, bringing light to the world. Each night, he journeyed through the underworld, the Duat, battling the serpent Apophis, who sought to devour him and end creation. Ra's daily victory ensured the continuation of existence itself. The pharaohs of Egypt claimed to be the sons of Ra, establishing their divine right to rule. During the 5th dynasty, around 2400 BCE, the sun cult became the dominant religious force in Egypt, though it never entirely displaced other gods. The priests of Ra at Heliopolis developed sophisticated creation myths in which Ra, sometimes called Atum Ra, brought himself into existence and then created the first gods through various means, including spitting, sneezing, or through an act of self-generation. Osiris, the god of the dead and resurrection, was among the most beloved deities in ancient Egypt. The myth of Osiris tells of a god-king who ruled Egypt wisely and well, teaching humanity agriculture and civilization. His jealous brother Set murdered him, dismembering his body and scattering the pieces across Egypt. Osiris's devoted wife Isis searched tirelessly for the pieces, reassembling his body with the help of her sister Nephthys and the god Anubis. Through powerful magic, Isis briefly restored Osiris to life long enough to conceive a son, Horus. Though Osiris could not return to the world of the living, he became the ruler of the underworld, judging the dead and offering the promise of resurrection. This myth resonated deeply with the Egyptian people because it offered hope for life after death. If Osiris, once dead and dismembered, could be restored and live eternally, then perhaps all humans could share in this resurrection. The myth also established the cosmic conflict between order, represented by Osiris and later by his son Horus, and chaos, represented by Set. The story of Horus's battle with Set to avenge his father and claim the throne of Egypt became a template for pharaonic succession. Each pharaoh was considered the living Horus, while his predecessor became Osiris in death. This mythology transformed the death of each king from a potential crisis into a cosmically ordained transition. Isis grew in importance throughout Egyptian history, eventually becoming one of the most widely worshipped deities in the ancient Mediterranean world. She was seen as the ideal mother and wife, a powerful magician, and a protector of the vulnerable. Her cult would eventually spread beyond Egypt, with temples dedicated to Isis appearing throughout the Roman Empire, and her worship continuing into the 6th century CE, long after Christianity had become dominant. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, presided over mummification and guided souls through the underworld. The Egyptians associated Anubis with jackals because these animals were often seen in cemeteries. By making the jackal divine, they hoped to transform a potential threat to the dead into a protector. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, and magic, served as the scribe of the gods and the inventor of hieroglyphs. He was said to maintain the universe through his knowledge and to record the judgment of souls in the afterlife. The Greeks would later identify Thoth with their god Hermes, leading to the syncretic deity Hermes Trismegistus and the development of Hermetic philosophy. Maat represented both a goddess and a fundamental concept in Egyptian thought: truth, justice, harmony, and cosmic order. The universe itself was believed to run on Ma'at, and the pharaoh's primary duty was to uphold Ma'at against the forces of chaos, or Isfet. In the afterlife, the deceased's heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at to determine if they had lived a just life. The Egyptian focus on the afterlife led to some of the most elaborate funerary practices in human history. The process of mummification could take up to 70 days and involved removing the internal organs, desiccating the body with natron salt, and wrapping it in linen bandages while reciting protective spells. This preservation was necessary because the Egyptians believed the soul, or Ba, needed to return to the body. The tomb served as a house for the deceased, and the living were expected to bring offerings to sustain the dead in the afterlife. The pyramid texts inscribed in the pyramids of the Old Kingdom from around 2300 BCE are among the oldest religious texts in the world. These spells and incantations were meant to assist the pharaoh in his journey to the afterlife and his transformation into a god. Later, these religious texts evolved into the coffin texts during the Middle Kingdom and eventually the Book of the Dead in the New Kingdom, which became available to non-royal individuals who could afford them. The Book of the Dead, more accurately translated as the Book of Coming Forth by Day, contained spells, hymns, and instructions for navigating the dangers of the underworld. One of the most famous sections describes the weighing of the heart ceremony. The deceased would stand before a tribunal of 42 divine judges and recite the negative confession, declaring all the sins they had not committed. Their heart would then be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If the heart, heavy with sin, outweighed the feather, it would be devoured by Amit, a chimeric demon, and the soul would cease to exist. If the heart was lighter or equal to the feather, the deceased would be justified and granted eternal life in the field of reeds, a paradise where they would live much as they had in Egypt, but without suffering, toil, or want. The reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten from approximately 1353 to 1336 BCE represented a dramatic but ultimately temporary shift in Egyptian religion. Akhenaten attempted to establish a form of monotheism centered on the Aten, the physical sun disk. He closed the temples of other gods, particularly those of Amun-Ra, and moved the capital to a new city, Akhetaten, modern Amarna. His religious revolution was accompanied by distinctive art styles, showing more naturalistic and sometimes strange portrayals of the royal family. However, Akhenaten's religious reforms did not outlast his reign. His successor, Tutankhamun, restored the traditional pantheon, and later pharaohs tried to erase Akhenaten's memory from history. The episode demonstrates both the power and the ultimate conservatism of Egyptian religion. Despite the pharaoh's supposed divine authority, the deeply rooted religious traditions and the power of the priestly classes proved stronger than any individual's attempt at reform. The temple complexes of Egypt served as more than places of worship. They were economic centers, controlling vast estates and wealth. The temple at Karnak, dedicated primarily to Amun-Ra, was one of the largest religious structures ever built, expanded over 2,000 years by successive pharaohs. Its hypostyle hall, with 134 massive columns, creates a forest of stone that even in ruins inspires awe. Egyptian priests formed a hereditary class, though priesthood was not always a full-time occupation. They underwent purification rituals, including shaving their entire bodies and abstaining from certain foods. The highest-ranking priests, the high priests of Amun-Ra, wielded enormous political power, sometimes rivaling that of the pharaoh himself. Daily temple rituals followed a similar pattern throughout Egypt. Each morning, the high priest would break the seal on the sanctuary, symbolically awakening the god. The statue of the deity would be washed, clothed in fresh linens, anointed with oils, and presented with food and drink. These rituals maintained Mat and ensured the gods continued to sustain the cosmos. Religious festivals brought these usually hidden rituals into public view. During the Opet festival at Thebes, the statue of Amun would be carried in a sacred bark from Karnak to Luxor Temple, accompanied by music, dancing, and celebration. These festivals reinforced the connection between the people, the gods, and the pharaoh, while also providing entertainment and breaking the monotony of agricultural life. The Egyptian influence on later religions was profound, though often indirect. The myth of a god who dies and is resurrected influenced later Mediterranean mystery religions. The concept of judgment after death and a weighing of souls appears in various forms in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The image of Isis nursing her son Horus may have influenced early Christian iconography of Mary and Jesus. Egyptian religion finally declined with the Roman conquest in 30 BCE and the spread of Christianity. The last hieroglyphic inscription was carved in 394 CE at the Temple of Isis at Philae. When the Byzantine Emperor Justinian ordered the temple closed in the 6th century CE, the ancient Egyptian religion, which had endured for over 3,000 years, finally came to an end. Chapter 3. The Gods of Ancient Greece. The religious world of ancient Greece was characterized by its anthropomorphic gods, its rich mythology, and its integration into every aspect of daily life. Greek religion was not based on sacred texts or dogma, but on practice, ritual, and the shared stories that every Greek knew from childhood. The 12 Olympian gods formed the core of the Greek pantheon, though many other deities, heroes, and spirits populated Greek religious thought. These gods were immortal and powerful, but not omnipotent or morally perfect. They experienced jealousy, anger, love, and pride. They intervened in human affairs, sometimes helping and sometimes harming mortals, often for their own purposes. Zeus, the king of the gods, ruled from Mount Olympus. He was the god of the sky, thunder, and justice. Zeus had overthrown his father Kronos, who had in turn overthrown his father Uranos, establishing a pattern of generational conflict that mirrored Greek anxieties about succession and authority. Despite being married to Hera, Zeus was notorious for his many affairs with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women, producing a vast number of divine and heroic offspring. Hera, Zeus's wife and sister, was the goddess of marriage and childbirth. She was often portrayed as jealous and vengeful, particularly towards Zeus's lovers and their children. However, this characterization may reflect patriarchal Greek attitudes more than the original nature of Hera's cult. In her own right, Hera was an ancient and powerful goddess with important sanctuaries, particularly at Argos and on the island of Samos. Poseidon ruled the seas, earthquakes, and horses. He was second in power only to Zeus and was said to be temperamental and violent when offended. The Greeks, being a seafaring people, particularly feared and honoured Poseidon. Sailors would pour libations into the sea before voyages, and coastal cities held regular festivals in his honour. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and crafts, was born fully grown and armoured from Zeus's head. She was the patron goddess of Athens, which bore her name, and her gift of the olive tree to the city was said to have won her this honour in competition with Poseidon. The Parthenon, the magnificent temple on the Acropolis, housed a massive statue of Athena made of gold and ivory. Apollo, god of music, poetry, prophecy, healing, and the sun, was one of the most widely worshipped Greek gods. His oracle at Delphi was the most famous and influential in the Greek world. Pilgrims came from across the Mediterranean to consult the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, who would enter a trance state and deliver prophecies that were often cryptic and required interpretation. The temple's maxims, "Know thyself," and "Nothing in excess," encapsulated important Greek philosophical values. Artemis, Apollo's twin sister, was the goddess of the hunt, wilderness, and childbirth. Despite being a virgin goddess, she protected women during childbirth, a reminder of the Greek understanding that divinity was not constrained by human logic or consistency. Her great temple at Ephesus was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, and sexuality, was born from the sea foam, according to Hesiod's theogony. She wielded tremendous power over gods and mortals alike through desire and love. Despite being married to the smith god Hephaestus, she had famous affairs with Ares, the god of war, and the mortal Adonis. Ares himself represented the chaotic, violent aspect of war, in contrast to Athena's strategic warfare. He was not particularly popular or widely worshipped, perhaps because the Greeks recognized that the brutality he embodied was necessary but not admirable. Hephaestus, the divine craftsman, was the only Olympian depicted as physically imperfect, usually as lame. He created magnificent weapons and objects for the gods, including Zeus's thunderbolts, Achilles' armour, and Pandora, the first woman. His worship was particularly strong in Athens, a city known for its craftsmen. Hermes served as the messenger of the gods, the patron of travellers, merchants, thieves, and the guide of souls to the underworld. He was often portrayed as clever and mischievous. The stone herms, pillars topped with Hermes' head and featuring erect phalluses, stood at crossroads and boundaries throughout Greece, serving as protective markers. Dionysus, god of wine, theatre, and ecstatic religious experience, represented the boundary-breaking, intoxicating aspects of existence that stood in tension with the order and rationality valued in Greek city-states. His worship involved dramatic rituals in which participants, often women called maenads, would enter frenzied states. The theatre itself grew out of festivals honouring Dionysus, and plays were performed as religious acts. Hades ruled the underworld, which bore his name. Though often portrayed in modern retellings as evil, Hades was actually seen as stern but just, and his realm was where all mortals eventually went after death. The Greeks made few sacrifices to Hades and built few temples for him, perhaps preferring not to draw his attention. Demeter, goddess of agriculture and the harvest, had one of the most important cult centres at Eleusis, near Athens. The Eleusinian mysteries, initiation rites held in her honour, promised initiates a blessed afterlife. The exact nature of these mysteries was a closely guarded secret, and remarkably, the secret was kept throughout antiquity and has never been definitively uncovered. The myth of Demeter and her daughter Persephone explained the seasons. When Hades abducted Persephone to be his wife, Demeter's grief caused the earth to become barren. Zeus finally negotiated a compromise. Persephone would spend part of the year with Hades in the underworld and part with her mother. When Persephone was below, winter reigned. When she returned, spring came. Greek religious practice centered on ritual rather than belief. The Greeks did not have a word equivalent to religion in the modern sense. Instead, religious practice was simply part of being Greek, integrated into civic and household life. Every home had altars to various gods, and every city had patron deities and major temples. Sacrifice was the central ritual act. Animals, typically sheep, goats, cattle, or pigs, would be killed, and portions burned as an offering to the gods, while the rest was consumed by the worshippers. This created a bond between the divine and human realms and reinforced community ties. Only the thigh bones wrapped in fat were burned for the gods, a practice humorously explained by the myth of Prometheus, who tricked Zeus into accepting the lesser portion. Festivals punctuated the Greek calendar. The Panathenaea, held in Athens every 4 years, involved processions, sacrifices, musical and athletic competitions, all in honour of Athena. The Eleusinian Mysteries, the Olympic Games in honour of Zeus, the Pythian Games at Delphi for Apollo, the Isthmian Games for Poseidon, and the Nemean Games were among the many regular festivals that structured Greek life. Oracles provided a means of communicating with the gods. Besides Delphi, there were oracles at Dodona, where Zeus was consulted through the rustling of oak leaves, and at Didyma, sacred to Apollo. People consulted oracles about matters ranging from personal concerns to major military campaigns. Hero cults formed an important aspect of Greek religion. Heroes were mortals who had achieved a status between humanity and divinity through their extraordinary deeds. Heracles, Theseus, Achilles, and many others received worship at their supposed tombs. These cults connected the mythical past to the present and provided local communities with their own divine protectors. The mystery religions offered more personal and emotionally satisfying religious experiences than traditional civic religion. Besides the Eleusinian mysteries, the Orphic mysteries, based on the mythical poet Orpheus, promised purification and a blessed afterlife to initiates who lived according to specific rules and underwent certain rites. Greek philosophy gradually developed a more abstract conception of divinity. The pre-Socratic philosophers sought natural rather than supernatural explanations for phenomena. Xenophanes criticized the anthropomorphism of traditional gods, pointing out that humans created gods in their own image. Socrates was executed partly for allegedly not believing in the city's gods, though his actual views were more complex. Plato's philosophy posited a realm of perfect eternal forms beyond the physical world, with the form of the good as the highest principle. This represented a significant move toward monotheism, or at least henotheism, the worship of one supreme god while acknowledging the existence of others. Aristotle conceived of a prime mover or unmoved mover, a perfect, eternal, unchanging entity that was the ultimate cause of all motion and change in the universe. This philosophical theology was quite removed from the colourful gods of traditional Greek religion. Despite these philosophical developments, traditional religion remained central to Greek life until the rise of Christianity. The gods continue to be honoured with sacrifices, festivals, and temples. When Christianity began to spread through the Greek-speaking world, it faced centuries of resistance, and even after becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire, older practices persisted in modified forms. The influence of Greek religion extended far beyond ancient Greece itself. As Greek culture spread through Alexander the Great's conquests in the 4th century BCE, Greek gods were identified with local deities throughout the Middle East and beyond. This syncretism created hybrid religious forms that enriched both Greek religion and the religions it encountered. Greek mythology profoundly influenced art, literature, and thought in Western civilization. The stories of the gods and heroes have been retold and reinterpreted for more than 2,000 years, continually finding new relevance and meaning in changing cultural contexts. Chapter 4: The Roman Divine Order. Roman religion developed from a complex mixture of indigenous Italic beliefs, Etruscan influences, and, especially after Rome's expansion, Greek religious ideas. What made Roman religion distinctive was its emphasis on state cult, contractual relationships with the divine, and the integration of religious authority with political power. The early Roman religion was less anthropomorphic than Greek religion. Roman deities were often more abstract powers or forces. Vesta, for instance, was not so much a goddess with a personality as the divine presence of the hearth fire itself. The Lares were protective spirits of the household and crossroads. The Penates protected the pantry and food stores. Janus, a uniquely Roman god with no Greek equivalent, was the god of beginnings, gates, transitions, and endings. He was typically portrayed with two faces looking in opposite directions, representing his ability to see both the past and the future. The month of January is named after him, marking the transition into the new year. Jupiter, the king of the gods, was associated with the sky and thunder, similar to the Greek Zeus, though Roman religion emphasized different aspects of his character. Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Jupiter best and greatest, was the protector of Rome itself. His temple on the Capitoline Hill was the religious center of Roman state religion. Roman generals would process to this temple after victorious campaigns, offering spoils to Jupiter and reinforcing the connection between military success and divine favor. Juno, Jupiter's wife, protected women and marriage. The month of June, considered the most auspicious for weddings, was named after her. Mars, the god of war, was particularly important to Rome, a militaristic society built on conquest. Unlike the Greek Ares, Mars was one of the most honored gods, second only to Jupiter in importance. The month of March, the traditional beginning of the military campaign season, bore his name. Minerva, equivalent to the Greek Athena, was the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. She formed part of the Capitoline triad with Jupiter and Juno, worshipped together in the great temple on the Capitoline Hill. Venus was the goddess of love and beauty, but also had a special connection to Rome. Julius Caesar claimed descent from Venus through her son Aeneas, the legendary founder of the Roman people. This divine ancestry was later emphasized by Augustus and subsequent emperors. The Romans had an unusually close identification between their gods and the state. The Vestal Virgins, priestesses of Vesta, tended the eternal flame in her temple in the Forum. If this flame were to go out, it would be seen as a terrible omen for Rome. The Vestals were among the few women in Rome with significant independence and status, though they paid for this with an absolute requirement of chastity for their 30-year term of service. A Vestal who broke her vow would be buried alive. Roman religion was characterized by what scholars call do ut de, I give so that you may give. The relationship with the gods was essentially contractual. Worshippers performed rituals correctly and made offerings, and in return, the gods were expected to provide protection, success, and prosperity. If the gods failed to uphold their end of the bargain, worship might be withheld or redirected to more reliable deities. This contractual nature meant that ritual precision was paramount in Roman religion. Priests had to perform every word and gesture exactly correctly, or the entire ceremony would need to be repeated. The College of Pontiffs, led by the Pontifex Maximus, maintained the calendar, oversaw sacrifices, and interpreted religious law. Julius Caesar held the position of Pontifex Maximus, and later Roman emperors would claim this title, making them the supreme religious authority. Augury, the interpretation of omens from the flight patterns and behavior of birds, was an essential practice. Before any important state action, such as passing laws or beginning military campaigns, augurs would take the auspices to determine if the gods approved. The College of Augurs held significant political power, as they could declare any day inauspicious and thus prevent state business from proceeding. The Romans practiced a form of divination called haruspicy, borrowed from the Etruscans, which involved examining the livers of sacrificed animals for omens. Haruspices were specialists in this practice, and the Roman state consulted them regularly on important matters. As Rome expanded, it encountered many other cultures and religions. The Roman approach was generally inclusive and syncretic. They identified foreign gods with their own through a process called interpretatio Romana. The Celtic god Lu might be identified with Mercury, the Egyptian Isis with the Roman goddess of the same name, the Germanic Donna with Jupiter. Rome also practiced evocatio, the ritual calling forth of an enemy city's gods to abandon that city and come to Rome, where they would receive better worship. This practice turned religion itself into a weapon of conquest, while also enriching the Roman pantheon. Foreign cults began to arrive in Rome during the Republic. The worship of Cybele, the great mother goddess from Anatolia, was officially brought to Rome in 204 BCE during the Second Punic War, after the Sibylline books prophesied that this would help defeat Hannibal. However, the ecstatic and orgiastic nature of her rites troubled Roman sensibilities, and restrictions were placed on Roman citizens' participation. the mystery religions, offering personal salvation and secret initiations, grew increasingly popular during the late Republic and Empire. The cult of Isis spread from Egypt throughout the Mediterranean. The cult of Mithras, a mysterious religion apparently of Persian origin that we know primarily through archaeology, became especially popular among Roman soldiers. Mithraism was practiced in underground temples called Mithraea, and its central ritual seemed to involve the slaying of a cosmic bull. Emperor worship represented a crucial development in Roman religion. The Romans had long deified exceptional individuals after death. Julius Caesar was posthumously declared a god, Divus Julius, in 42 BCE. His adopted son Octavian, who became Augustus, was thus the son of a god, Divi Filius. Augustus was careful not to claim full divinity during his lifetime in Rome itself, though he allowed himself to be worshipped as a god in the eastern provinces, where divine kingship was a familiar concept. However, he encouraged worship of his genius, his divine spirit, and his noumen, his divine power. After his death in 14 CE, he was officially deified, establishing a pattern followed by most subsequent emperors. The imperial cult served important political functions. It provided a unifying focus for the diverse empire, creating a common religious practice that transcended local traditions. Refusal to participate in emperor worship, to burn a pinch of incense before the emperor's statue and acknowledge his divinity, was seen as political rebellion rather than merely a religious choice. This would become a major source of conflict with Christians and Jews who refused to worship anyone but their own god. The Emperor Caligula, who ruled from 37 to 41 CE, apparently took his own divinity more seriously than most, demanding worship even during his lifetime and allegedly planning to place his statue in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, a plan only his assassination prevented. Vespasian, emperor from 69 to 79 CE, maintained more perspective. On his deathbed, he reportedly joked, "Oh dear, I think I'm becoming a god," mocking the automatic deification of deceased emperors. The Roman calendar was filled with religious festivals. The Saturnalia in December, honouring the god Saturn, was a time of role reversal when slaves could speak freely and masters would serve them. The Lupercalia in February involved priests running through the streets, striking women with goatskin thongs to promote fertility. The Vestalia in June opened Vesta's temple, normally forbidden to men, for women to make offerings. Public games, or ludi, though often thought of as entertainment, were religious festivals. The gladiatorial contests, chariot races, and theatrical performances were all originally offerings to the gods. The Colosseum, which could hold 50,000 spectators, was inaugurated in 80 CE with 100 days of games. While we often view such spectacles as mere entertainment or brutal displays, the Romans saw them as maintaining the Pax Deorum, the peace with the gods. Household religion was equally important in Roman life. Each home had a lararium, a shrine to the household gods, the Lares, the Penates, and the genius of the paterfamilias, the male head of household. Daily offerings maintained the protection of these domestic deities. Ancestor worship played a significant role. The Romans preserved death masks of their ancestors and displayed them in the atrium. During funerals of important men, actors would wear these masks, symbolically bringing the ancestors back to witness the family's continuity. The Parentalia in February was dedicated to honouring dead family members. Families would visit tombs, make offerings of food and wine, and celebrate meals at grave sites, physically including the dead in family gatherings. The gradual rise of Christianity fundamentally challenged Roman religion. Christians refused to participate in sacrifices to the emperor or traditional gods, refused to acknowledge the divinity of the emperor, and claimed exclusive truth for their religion. These positions seemed antisocial and atheistic to most Romans. Persecution of Christians was sporadic and usually localized. The great empire-wide persecutions under emperors like Decius in 250 CE and Diocletian beginning in 303 CE were attempts to shore up traditional religion and unity in times of crisis. Christians were ordered to sacrifice to the gods and emperor or face punishment. However, Constantine's conversion to Christianity in the early 4th century CE changed everything. The Edict of Milan in 313 CE granted religious tolerance throughout the empire. By the end of the 4th century, under Theodosius I, Christianity had become the official state religion, and pagan worship was increasingly restricted and eventually banned. The last recorded gladiatorial contest took place in 404 CE. The Olympic Games, with their pagan religious associations, were abolished in 393 CE. Temples were closed or converted to churches. The great statue of Zeus at Olympia, one of the seven wonders, was destroyed. The Eleusinian mysteries were ended when the temple was destroyed by invading Goths in 395 CE. Yet the transition was gradual and uneven. Many people maintained traditional practices alongside Christianity. Festivals were Christianized rather than eliminated. The Saturnalia became Christmas. The spring fertility festivals became Easter, and the dead of the Parentalia were honoured on All Saints' Day. Temples became churches, often dedicated to saints whose attributes resembled those of the gods previously worshipped there. The influence of Roman religion persists in Western culture. The days of the week are named after Roman gods. Sunday for Sol, the sun; Monday for Luna, the moon; Saturday for Saturn. The months retain names from the Roman calendar: January from Janus, March from Mars, May from Maia, June from Juno. Western legal traditions, architectural forms, artistic motifs, and literary themes all bear marks of Roman religious culture. Chapter 5: The Ancient Chinese Cosmos. Chinese religion and philosophy developed along paths quite different from those of the Mediterranean world. Rather than anthropomorphic gods with distinct personalities, Chinese spirituality emphasized the harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity, the flow of cosmic energy, and the proper performance of one's social role. The Shang dynasty, ruling from approximately 1600 to 1046 BCE, practiced an elaborate ancestor worship and divination system. The Shang believed in a supreme deity called Shangdi, the Lord on high, who controlled natural phenomena and human fate. However, ancestors of the royal family could petition Shangdi on behalf of their living descendants, creating a crucial link between heaven and earth. Oracle bones, typically turtle shells or ox shoulder blades, were used for divination. Questions would be inscribed on the bone, which was then heated until it cracked. Diviners would interpret the pattern of cracks as answers from the spirits. Tens of thousands of these oracle bones have been discovered, providing crucial evidence for early Chinese writing and religious practices. The Zhou dynasty, which overthrew the Shang around 1046 BCE, introduced the concept of the Mandate of Heaven, or Tianming. This revolutionary idea held that heaven granted the right to rule to virtuous leaders, but would withdraw this mandate from corrupt or incompetent rulers. This provided religious justification for the Zhou conquest, while also establishing that political authority depended on moral conduct, not mere power. The concept of heaven, or Tian, evolved over time. Initially, a more personal deity, similar to Shangdi, Tian gradually became more abstract, representing the cosmic order, natural law, and moral principle rather than a god with human-like attributes. Central to Chinese thought is the concept of qi, the vital energy or life force that flows through all things. Heaven, earth, and every living being contain qi. Maintaining the proper flow and balance of qi is essential for health, harmony, and prosperity. The principles of yin and yang represent complementary forces whose interaction creates all phenomena. Yin is associated with darkness, femininity, passivity, earth, cold, and the moon. Yang is associated with light, masculinity, activity, heaven, heat, and the sun. Neither is superior, both are necessary, and harmony comes from their balance. This dualistic framework shaped Chinese understanding of everything from medicine to politics to architecture. The 5 elements, or 5 phases, metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, represent another system for understanding cosmic processes. These elements generate and control each other in specific cycles. Wood feeds fire. Fire creates earth through ash. Earth contains metal. Metal collects water through condensation. Water nourishes wood. Understanding these relationships allowed Chinese thinkers to organize and predict natural and social phenomena. Confucius, living from 551 to 479 BCE, did not claim to establish a new religion, but rather to restore the values and practices of ancient sage kings. His teachings, compiled by his disciples in the Analects, emphasized Ren, humaneness or benevolence, Lai, proper ritual conduct, and Shao, filial piety. Confucius focused on this worldly ethics rather than metaphysical speculation. When asked about serving spirits and gods, he replied, "If you are not yet able to serve people, how can you serve spirits?" When asked about death, he said, "If you do not yet understand life, how can you understand death?" Despite this pragmatic focus, Confucianism was deeply religious in its understanding of a moral cosmos and humanity's place within it. Heaven, though not anthropomorphized, had a will and expectations. The Junzi, the gentleman or superior person, cultivates virtue not for reward, but because virtue aligns human nature with heavenly principle. Filial piety, the respect and care for parents and ancestors, became the foundation of Chinese social ethics. The family, not the individual, was the basic unit of society. Ancestor worship was not mere superstition, but a recognition of continuity between past, present, and future generations. Ancestors remained part of the family, receiving offerings and exerting influence on the living. Elaborate ancestral tablets recorded the names of deceased family members and served as focal points for offerings of food, incense, and ritual observances. Major decisions might be announced to the ancestors at the family altar. During the Qingming festival, Families would visit and clean ancestral graves, make offerings, and maintain the connection between the living and the dead. Confucianism eventually became the state ideology of China, shaping education, government, and social structure for over 2,000 years. The civil service examination system, based on Confucian classics, created a meritocratic bureaucracy of scholar officials who governed according to Confucian principles. Daoism emerged as a complementary tradition to Confucianism. While Confucianism emphasized social duty, hierarchy, and active engagement, Daoism valued spontaneity, naturalness, and harmony with the Tao, the way, the fundamental principle underlying all existence. The legendary founder of Daoism, Laozi, supposedly an older contemporary of Confucius, may or may not have been a historical figure. The text attributed to him, the Tao Te Ching or Tao Te Ching, is a profound and paradoxical work emphasizing wu wei, non-action or action without forcing, naturalness, and simplicity. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The text begins, immediately establishing that ultimate reality transcends language and conceptual understanding. The Tao Te Ching suggests that by not striving, one accomplishes more. By not acting forcefully, one acts more effectively. By being soft and yielding like water, one overcomes the hard and rigid. Zhuangzi, living around the 4th century BCE, expanded Taoist philosophy with humor, storytelling, and radical perspectives. His famous butterfly dream, in which he dreamed he was a butterfly and then awakened unsure whether he was a man who had dreamed of being a butterfly or a butterfly now dreaming of being a man, questioned the nature of reality and identity. Philosophical Taoism focused on personal transformation and understanding. Religious Taoism, which developed later, incorporated elaborate ritual systems, deities, immortality practices, alchemy, and magic. The Queen Mother of the West, the Jade Emperor, and the 8 Immortals populated a rich celestial bureaucracy mirroring earthly government. Taoist priests performed rituals to harmonize communities with cosmic forces, exorcise demons, and ensure prosperity. Taoist monasteries preserved texts and practices, and Taoist recluses sought immortality through meditation, breathing exercises, dietary practices, and alchemical preparations. The pursuit of immortality took various forms in Taoist practice. Physical immortality might be achieved through internal alchemy, transforming bodily energies. Some sought to become Shan, immortal beings who transcended normal human limitations. Others aimed for spiritual immortality, continuing conscious existence after physical death. Buddhism arrived in China from India around the 1st century CE, bringing new concepts of karma, reincarnation, and enlightenment. Initially, Buddhism was understood through Taoist concepts, creating what scholars call Geiyai Buddhism, matching Buddhist terms with Taoist equivalents. Over centuries, Buddhism became thoroughly Sinicized, adapting to Chinese culture while transforming it. The Pure Land school, emphasizing faith in Amitabha Buddha and rebirth in his Western paradise, became immensely popular. Chan Buddhism, known as Zen in Japan, combined Buddhist meditation with Taoist naturalness, emphasizing sudden enlightenment and direct experience over scriptural study. Buddhist monasteries became centers of learning, art, and social welfare. Monks and nuns withdrew from family life to pursue enlightenment, creating tension with Confucian emphasis on filial duty and social contribution. Despite periodic persecution, Buddhism became one of the three teachings, along with Confucianism and Daoism, that shaped Chinese civilization. The Chinese religious landscape was remarkably syncretic. A single individual might consult Confucian ethics for social relations, seek Taoist practices for health and longevity, and turn to Buddhism for understanding death and afterlife. Temples often housed Confucian, Taoist, and Buddhist elements together. Folk religion incorporated all three traditions, along with local deities, nature spirits, and ancestors. Every locality had its tutelary deities, every profession its patron gods, every household its protective spirits. The kitchen god watched over each home and reported annually to the Jade Emperor on the family's conduct. Festivals structured the year. The Spring Festival or Lunar New Year, still celebrated today, involved thorough house cleaning to sweep away bad fortune, family reunions, offerings to ancestors, and rituals to welcome prosperity. The Mid-Autumn Festival celebrated the harvest and family unity. The Qingming Festival honoured ancestors. The Dragon Boat Festival commemorated the poet Ku Yuan and involved races of boats carved like dragons. Chinese emperors performed elaborate rituals to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. The emperor, holding the mandate of heaven, served as the crucial link between the human and divine realms. At the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, the emperor would perform the annual winter solstice sacrifice, ensuring that heaven would continue to favour China. Confucian temples throughout China honoured Confucius with regular sacrifices and ceremonies. These were not worship in the Western sense, but expressions of reverence for the great teacher. Scholars would bow before Confucius's tablet before examinations, seeking inspiration and success. The examination system itself had quasi-religious significance. Success brought honour to ancestors, fulfilled filial duty, and aligned one with the cosmic order. The examination halls were sites of intense prayer and ritual preparation. Chinese medicine was inseparable from religious and philosophical concepts. Disease resulted from imbalances in qi, blockages in meridians, or disharmony between yin and yang. Treatment involved acupuncture to redirect qi flow, herbal medicines to restore balance, and lifestyle adjustments to maintain harmony with natural rhythms. Feng Shui, literally wind-water, applied cosmological principles to spatial arrangement. The proper placement of buildings, graves, furniture, and entire cities could enhance the flow of beneficial qi and avoid harmful influences. Masters of Feng Shui studied the landscape using complex calculations based on yin-yang theory and the 5 elements to determine auspicious sites and orientations. Chinese astrology connected celestial patterns to earthly events. The emperor's astronomers watched for comets, eclipses, and unusual stellar configurations, interpreting them as omens about government policy and natural disasters. The zodiac cycle of 12 animals and the system of heavenly stems and earthly branches created a 60-year cycle used for calendrical and divination purposes. The concept of retribution, inherited from Buddhism but adapted to Chinese thought, held that good deeds would be rewarded and evil punished, if not in this life, then in the next, or upon one's descendants. Morality books recorded good and evil acts with specific point values. People could calculate their moral balance and understand their fate accordingly. Hell in Chinese Buddhism was not eternal, but a place of temporary punishment and purification. The 10 courts of hell, presided over by judges, determined appropriate punishments for specific sins. After serving their sentences, souls would drink from the river of forgetfulness and be reincarnated, beginning the cycle anew. The Ghost Festival in the 7th lunar month opened the gates of hell, allowing spirits to return to the world. Families made offerings to their ancestors and to hungry ghosts, spirits without descendants to care for them. This compassionate practice aimed to relieve the suffering of all beings, not just one's own family. Secret societies and millennial movements often combined religious and political goals. The White Lotus Society, the Red Turbans, and others challenged dynastic authority in the name of religious visions, promising a new age of peace and prosperity. The Taiping Rebellion in the 19th century, led by Hongshu Quan, who claimed to be the younger brother of Jesus Christ, combined Christian and Chinese religious ideas in a revolutionary movement that devastated China and killed tens of millions. The Communist Revolution of 1949 attempted to suppress religious practice as feudal superstition. Temples were destroyed, priests and monks forced to return to lay life, and religious texts burned, especially during the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976. However, religion proved resilient. Since the Reform era beginning in the late 1970s, there has been significant religious revival in China, with temples rebuilt, monasteries reopened, and new generations rediscovering traditional practices. The influence of Chinese religion extended throughout East Asia. Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and other neighboring cultures adapted Confucianism, Buddhism, and Chinese religious practices to their own contexts, creating variations while maintaining core concepts. Chapter 6. The Vedic Traditions of Ancient India. The religious traditions of ancient India, eventually developing into what we now call Hinduism, represent some of humanity's most complex and sophisticated theological and philosophical systems. Unlike the other religions we have discussed, which have mostly ceased to be practiced, Hinduism continues as a living tradition with over 1 billion adherents today. The earliest textual sources for Indian religion are the Vedas, composed in Sanskrit between approximately 1500 and 500 BCE, though possibly containing much older oral traditions. The 4 Vedas, Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharveda, are considered Shruti, meaning that which is heard, eternal truth revealed to ancient sages. The Rig Veda, the oldest and most important, contains 1028 hymns dedicated to various deities. These gods, or devas, were associated with natural phenomena, but conceived in increasingly sophisticated ways that suggested deeper cosmic principles. Indra, king of the gods, was a warrior deity who wielded the thunderbolt and slayed Vritra, a serpent or dragon that had imprisoned the waters. This myth may represent the arrival of monsoon rains after drought, or the victory of order over chaos. Indra was celebrated as a mighty hero who drank vast quantities of soma, a ritual drink that may have been psychoactive before his battles. Agni, the fire god, played a crucial role as intermediary between humans and gods. Fire consumed sacrifices, transforming physical offerings into smoke that rose to the heavenly realms. Agni was thus the divine priest, and every sacrifice was simultaneously an offering to Agni and through Agni to other gods. Varuna was the guardian of cosmic and moral order, RTA. He was associated with the sky and waters and watched over oaths and contracts. Varuna punished those who violated cosmic law with disease and misfortune, but could also forgive those who sought purification. Surya, the sun god, drove across the sky in a chariot, illuminating the world and dispelling darkness and evil. Ushas, goddess of dawn, was celebrated in beautiful hymns describing her rosy light spreading across the sky. The Ashvins, divine twins, were healers and helpers in distress, often invoked by those seeking aid. Soma, besides being the ritual drink, was also deified, praised in numerous hymns for its invigorating and possibly hallucinogenic properties. The later Vedic period saw the rise of more abstract speculation. The Purusha Sukta, hymn 90 of the Rigveda's 10th book, describes the sacrifice of the cosmic man, Purusha, from whose body the world and the social orders were created. His mouth became the Brahmins, priests and scholars. His arms became the Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers. His thighs became the Vaishyas, merchants and farmers, and his feet became the Shudras, servants and labourers. This hymn provided religious justification for the caste system, though scholars debate when the rigid caste hierarchy actually developed. The Nasadiya Sukta, the creation hymn from Rigveda 10.129, displays remarkable philosophical sophistication. It questions the origins of existence, suggesting that even the gods came after creation, and that perhaps no one, not even in the highest heaven, knows how creation occurred. This agnosticism about ultimate origins is unusual in religious texts. The Brahmanas, prose texts composed after the Vedas, elaborate on ritual practice. They contain detailed instructions for sacrifices, explanations of ritual symbolism, and theological discussions. The Brahmanas reflect a priestly class, the Brahmins, who monopolized religious knowledge and ritual performance. Vedic sacrifice could range from simple domestic offerings to elaborate multi-day ceremonies requiring numerous priests, extensive preparations, and significant wealth. The Ashvamedha, horse sacrifice, took a full year and involved releasing a horse to wander freely, claiming all territory it traversed for the sponsoring king. The ceremony culminated in the horse's sacrifice, with the chief queen ritually lying with the dead horse to ensure fertility and prosperity. The Aranyakas, or forest texts, represent a transitional stage toward more philosophical speculation. These texts were studied by those withdrawing from active life into forest hermitages to contemplate spiritual matters. The Upanishads, composed from around 800 BCE onward, mark a revolutionary development in Indian religious thought. These philosophical dialogues and speculations moved beyond ritual to explore the nature of reality, self, and ultimate truth. The Upanishads introduced or elaborated several crucial concepts. Brahman represented the ultimate reality, the cosmic principle underlying all existence. It was described as Sat Chit Ananda, being, consciousness, and bliss. Brahman was both immanent and transcendent, present within everything, yet beyond all attributes and descriptions. Atman represented the individual self or soul. A central Upanishadic insight was that Atman and Brahman were ultimately identical. The apparent separateness of individual souls was illusion. In reality, The deepest self was one with the cosmic absolute. Tattvam asi, thou art that, the teacher would tell the student, revealing this identity. Maya, often translated as illusion, referred to the cosmic force that created the appearance of multiplicity and separateness. The world of ordinary experience was not exactly unreal, but was a lower level of reality, like a dream compared to waking. True liberation came from seeing through Maya to recognize one's identity with Brahman. Samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth, bound all beings to repeated lives. One's actions in each life determined one's circumstances in the next through karma, the law of cause and effect applied to moral action. Good deeds led to better rebirths, bad deeds to worse ones. This cycle continued until one achieved moksha, liberation, breaking free from samsara entirely by realizing one's true nature as Brahman. The concepts of karma and reincarnation do not appear clearly in the earliest Vedic texts, but became central to later Indian religion. They provided a theodicy, explaining suffering as the result of past actions, while offering hope that through proper conduct and spiritual practice, one could improve one's situation across lifetimes and eventually escape the cycle entirely. The path to liberation involved various practices. Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, emphasized study and meditation to achieve direct realization of Brahman. Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion, focused on loving surrender to a personal deity. Karma Yoga, the path of action, involved performing one's duties selflessly without attachment to results. Raja Yoga involved meditation and control of mental states. Around the 6th century BCE, new religious movements challenged Vedic orthodoxy. Gautama Buddha, born around 563 BCE, achieved enlightenment and began teaching what would become Buddhism. He rejected the authority of the Vedas, the caste system, and the efficacy of ritual, instead teaching a practical path to end suffering through ethical conduct, meditation, and wisdom. Mahavira, a contemporary of Buddha, reformed and possibly founded Jainism, teaching extreme non-violence, asceticism, and a path to liberation through purifying the soul from karmic matter. In response to these challenges, Hindu thought continued to evolve. The great epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, were composed over several centuries, reaching their final forms around 400 CE. These texts combined adventure, philosophy, and religious instruction in immensely influential narratives. The Bhagavad Gita, part of the Mahabharata, became one of Hinduism's most beloved texts. It presents a dialogue between the warrior prince Arjuna and Krishna, an avatar of the god Vishnu, on the battlefield before a great war. Arjuna, horrified at the prospect of killing his relatives and teachers in the opposing army, refuses to fight. Krishna teaches Arjuna about duty, the nature of the self, and paths to the divine. He explains that the true self, the Atman, is eternal and cannot be killed. Only the body dies. Arjuna must fulfill his dharma, his duty as a warrior, but do so without attachment to the fruits of action. Krishna reveals himself as the supreme deity, the source of all existence, in a theophany that represents one of Hinduism's most powerful expressions of divine immanence and transcendence. The Puranas, composed from around 300 CE onward, elaborated on mythology, cosmology, and devotional practice. They describe numerous gods and goddesses with detailed stories of their deeds, relationships, and manifestations. The Trimurti, or Hindu Trinity, consisted of Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. However, in practice, Brahma received relatively little worship. The major Hindu traditions centered on either Vishnu or Shiva as the supreme deity, with other gods understood as aspects or subordinate beings. Vishnu, who had been a relatively minor deity in Vedic times, rose to supreme importance. He was believed to descend to earth in various avatars, incarnations, to restore Dharma when evil threatened to overwhelm the world. The 10 traditional avatars included Matsya the fish, Kurma the tortoise, Varaha the boar, Narasimha the man-lion, Vamana the dwarf, Parashurama, Rama, Krishna, Buddha, and Kalki, who is yet to come. The avatars of Rama and Krishna became particularly important. Rama, the hero of the Ramayana, embodied Dharma, fighting the demon king Ravana to rescue his wife Sita. Krishna appeared as a charming child, a playful youth, beloved by cowherds, a wise teacher, and a powerful king. His love affair with Radha and the gopis, cowherd girls, was interpreted as symbolizing the soul's love for God. Vaishnavism, worship of Vishnu and his avatars, emphasized bhakti, devotional love. Saints and poets composed hymns expressing intense longing for union with the divine. The divine was approached not with fear, but with love, sometimes expressed through the metaphor of erotic love, as in the relationship between Krishna and Radha. Shaivism centered on Shiva, a complex deity embodying contradictions. He was the great ascetic, meditating in the Himalayas, covered in ash, wearing a tiger skin, his hair matted. Yet he was also the lord of dance, Nataraja, whose cosmic dance created, preserved, and destroyed the universe in endless cycles. He was the supreme yogi, yet married to Parvati, with whom he had 2 sons, the elephant-headed Ganesha and the warrior god Skanda. Shiva was associated with destruction, but also with transformation and regeneration. He wore a necklace of skulls and frequented cremation grounds, yet he also granted boons to devotees. His symbol, the lingam, represented creative power and was worshipped throughout India. Shakti, the goddess, represented divine feminine power. She appeared in many forms, as Parvati, Shiva's loving wife, as Durga, the warrior goddess who defeated demons the male gods could not overcome, as Kali, the terrifying goddess of time and death, wearing a garland of skulls and a skirt of severed arms, her tongue lolling out, yet also a loving mother to her devotees. Shaktism, worship of the goddess, saw her as the supreme power, Shakti, from which even the male gods derived their abilities. Some Shakta traditions involved tantric practices, ritual techniques involving mantras, yantras, symbolic diagrams, and sometimes controversial practices meant to transcend ordinary consciousness and social norms. Hindu temples served as earthly dwellings for the gods. The inner sanctum, the Garbhagriha, or womb chamber, housed the deity's image, which was treated as a living presence. Priests would wake the deity each morning, bathe and dress the image, offer food, and perform arati, the waving of lamps before the deity. Pilgrimage to sacred sites was an important practice. The Ganges River was considered especially holy, believed to flow from Shiva's hair. Bathing in the Ganges purified one of sin. The city of Varanasi, sacred to Shiva, was considered an especially auspicious place to die, as those who died there were believed to achieve instant liberation. The Kumbh Mela, a massive pilgrimage festival occurring every 12 years at 4 locations, attracted tens of millions of pilgrims. The 1989 Kumbh Mela may have been the largest gathering of humans ever, with estimates of up to 70 million participants over the festival period. Yoga, meaning union, developed as a systematic practice for achieving spiritual liberation. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, composed around the 4th century CE, outlined an 8-limbed path including ethical principles, physical postures, breath control, sensory withdrawal, concentration, meditation, and finally samadhi, absorption in the object of meditation and union with the divine. The caste system, though not universal throughout Indian history and varying significantly by region and period, organized society into hierarchical groups determined by birth. While the Vedas mentioned 4 varnas, in practice, thousands of jatis, subcastes defined by occupation and marriage patterns, created a complex social structure. Those outside the caste system, formerly called untouchables and now referred to as Dalits, faced severe discrimination. Hindu reformers have challenged caste hierarchies, and modern India has legally abolished untouchability, but caste continues to influence Indian society. The religious justification through karma and dharma provided ideological support for inequality, though some Hindu thinkers reinterpreted these concepts in more egalitarian ways. Women's status in Hindu tradition varied considerably across time and region. Vedic women could study, compose hymns, and participate in religious discussions. Later periods saw restrictions increase, with child marriage becoming common and widows facing severe social limitations. The practice of sati, in which a widow would burn herself on her husband's funeral pyre, though never universal and often coerced, was practiced in some regions until banned by the British in 1829. However, Hindu tradition also produced remarkable women saints and poets. Mirabai, a 16th century princess, left her royal life to wander as a devotee of Krishna, composing passionate devotional poems. Andal, a 9th century Tamil saint, imagined herself as Krishna's bride in ecstatic verses that influenced South Indian Vaishnavism. Hindu philosophy developed sophisticated schools of thought. Vedanta, based on the Upanishads, included various interpretations. Advaita Vedanta, elaborated by Shankara in the 8th century CE, taught non-dualism. Only Brahman was real, and the multiplicity of the world was ultimately illusory. Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita Vedanta in the 11th century taught qualified non-dualism, accepting both unity and real distinctions. Madhva's Dvaita Vedanta in the 13th century maintained dualism between souls and God. Samkhya philosophy developed a dualistic system distinguishing Purusha, pure consciousness, from Prakriti, matter and energy. Yoga philosophy built on Samkhya's metaphysics. Nyaya developed logic and epistemology. Vaisheshika categorized reality into distinct categories. Mimamsa focused on Vedic ritual interpretation. Hindu influence spread beyond India through trade and cultural exchange. Southeast Asian kingdoms adopted Hinduism along with Buddhism. The temple complex of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, originally dedicated to Vishnu, remains the largest religious structure ever built. Hindu kingdoms flourished in Indonesia, where the traditions still survive on Bali. The Muslim conquests of India, beginning in the 12th century, brought Islam into sustained contact with Hinduism. This encounter produced Sikhism in the 15th century, combining elements of both traditions into a new religion, emphasizing one God, equality, and devotion. Sufism, Islamic mysticism, found common ground with Hindu Bhakti traditions. British colonialism brought Western scholarship and sometimes dismissive attitudes toward Hindu tradition, but also sparked reform movements. Ram Mohan Roy founded the Brahmo Samaj, seeking to reform Hinduism by rejecting polytheism and caste. Swami Vivekananda presented Vedanta philosophy to the West at the Parliament of World Religions in 1893, beginning Hinduism's significant influence on Western spirituality. Mahatma Gandhi drew on Hindu concepts like ahimsa, non-violence, and satyagraha, truth force, in India's independence movement. He reinterpreted Hindu tradition to oppose caste discrimination and religious communalism, while remaining deeply Hindu in his worldview. Modern Hinduism is extraordinarily diverse, encompassing philosophical monism and popular polytheism, ancient rituals and contemporary interpretations, conservative traditionalism, and progressive reform. Yet certain threads connect these variations: the authority of the Vedas, though interpreted in many ways, the concepts of karma, dharma, and moksha, the possibility of many paths to the divine, and a general inclusivism that can honor multiple truths simultaneously. Chapter 7: Smaller Ancient Civilizations. Beyond the major civilizations we have explored, numerous other ancient cultures developed rich spiritual traditions that influenced their regions and contributed to humanity's religious diversity. Though we cannot examine all of them in detail, several deserve our attention. The ancient Persians developed Zoroastrianism, which profoundly influenced later monotheistic religions. Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, likely lived sometime between 1500 and 1000 BCE, though dating remains uncertain. His teachings emphasized the cosmic struggle between Ahura Mazda, the wise lord and supreme deity of truth and light, and Angra Mainyu, also called Ahriman, the destructive spirit of lies and darkness. Zoroastrianism was perhaps the first religion to articulate clear ethical dualism. Humans were called to choose between truth and lies, good and evil. The universe was a battleground where these forces contended, and human choices mattered cosmically. Eventually, good would triumph, the dead would be resurrected, and the world would be purified and perfected. Zoroastrian priests, called magi, maintained sacred fires that burned perpetually in temples, representing Ahura Mazda's divine light. The religion emphasized purity, with elaborate rules about maintaining cleanliness and avoiding pollution. The dead were not buried or cremated, but exposed in structures called towers of silence, where vultures would consume the flesh, preventing contamination of sacred earth and fire. Concepts that appeared in Zoroastrianism and later influenced Judaism, Christianity, and Islam include angels and demons as distinct spiritual beings, a savior figure who would come at the end of time, a final judgment, and resurrection of the dead. The extent of this influence is debated, but the similarities are striking, particularly as Jews encountered Zoroastrianism during the Persian period. The Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great and his successors generally practiced religious tolerance, allowing conquered peoples to maintain their own faiths. This policy allowed the Jews to return from Babylonian exile and rebuild their temple. Zoroastrianism remained the dominant religion of Iran until the Islamic conquest in the 7th century CE. Today, small Zoroastrian communities continue in Iran and India, where they are known as Parsis. The ancient Celts, spread across much of Western and Central Europe by the Iron Age, practiced a polytheistic religion known primarily through archaeology, Roman accounts, and later Irish and Welsh literature. Celtic religion was not uniform, but varied by region and tribe. The Celts worshipped numerous gods and goddesses. The Dagda, the good god, was associated with fertility, agriculture, and magic. Lu was a youthful god of arts and crafts. Brigid, later Christianized as Saint Brigid, was a goddess of poetry, healing, and smithcraft. Cernunnos, the horned god, was associated with animals and the wilderness. Nature held sacred significance for the Celts. Groves, springs, rivers, and certain trees were considered holy. The Druids, the priestly class, conducted rituals in sacred groves rather than constructed temples. They were also judges, teachers, and keepers of oral tradition, memorizing vast amounts of poetry, history, and lore. The Romans, who conquered most Celtic territories, portrayed Druids as barbaric practitioners of human sacrifice. While some archaeological evidence suggests ritual killing occurred, Roman accounts were likely exaggerated to justify conquest. What is clear is that Druids held considerable authority in Celtic society. Celtic festivals marked the turning of seasons. Samhain, at the end of October, marked the beginning of winter and was a time when the boundary between the living and dead was believed to be thin. Imbolc, in early February, celebrated the first signs of spring. Beltane, in early May, celebrated the beginning of summer with fire festivals. Lughnasadh, in early August, marked the beginning of harvest season. These festivals influenced later Christian holidays and continue to be celebrated in various forms. The Celts believed in an afterlife, possibly involving transmigration of souls. Warriors fought fearlessly, according to Roman accounts, because they believed death in this world meant birth in another. Elaborate burials with grave goods suggest belief in continuing existence after death. Celtic Christianity, which developed as the Roman Empire withdrew from Celtic lands, maintained distinctive features possibly influenced by pre-Christian traditions. The emphasis on nature, the importance of sacred wells and sites, and the Celtic cross combining a Christian cross with a circle may represent continuities with earlier religion. The ancient Norse and Germanic peoples shared related religious traditions. The Norse gods, known from later Icelandic sagas and Eddi poetry, lived in Asgard and were called Aesir and Vanir, two groups of gods that had once warred but later made peace. Odin, the All-Father, was the chief god, associated with wisdom, war, poetry, and magic. He had sacrificed one eye for wisdom and hung himself on the world tree Yggdrasil for 9 days to gain knowledge of runes. He welcomed slain warriors to Valhalla, his hall, where they would feast and fight until Ragnarok, the end of the world. Thor, Odin's son, was the god of thunder, wielding the mighty hammer Mjolnir. He was the protector of humanity and the gods against giants and other threats. Thor was perhaps the most widely worshipped Norse god, popular among common folk for his strength and protection. Freya, the most prominent goddess, was associated with love, beauty, fertility, war, and death. She claimed half of the warriors who died in battle, bringing them to her hall, Folkvanga. Frey, possibly her twin brother, was associated with fertility, prosperity, and fair weather. Loki, a trickster figure, was both helper and hindrance to the gods. His mischief ranged from pranks to murder, and his children included the wolf Fenrir, who would kill Odin at Ragnarok, the world serpent Jormungandr, and Hel, the goddess of the underworld realm of the dead. The Norse conception of the cosmos included 9 worlds connected by the world tree Yggdrasil. Midgard was the human realm, surrounded by ocean where the serpent Jormungandr lay. Asgard was the realm of the gods. Jotunheim was the land of giants. Niflheim was a frozen, misty realm, while Muspelheim was a realm of fire. Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, was prophesied to end the current cosmic cycle. Fenrir would break free and devour Odin. Thor would kill Jormungandr, but die from its poison. Loki and Heimdall would kill each other. The world would burn and sink into the sea. However, the world would then rise again, renewed, with surviving gods and a human couple repopulating the earth. Norse religious practice centered on sacrifice, called blot. Animals would be sacrificed, their blood sprinkled on altars and participants, and their meat consumed in communal feasts. Archaeological evidence suggests some human sacrifice occurred, particularly of war prisoners or slaves accompanying important persons in death. Runes served both as an alphabet and as magical symbols. Each rune had meanings beyond its sound, and runic inscriptions often served protective or ritual purposes. The ability to read and interpret runes was considered a form of magic. Norse religion began to decline with the conversion to Christianity, which spread through Scandinavia between the 9th and 12th centuries. The process was often violent and coerced, with kings converting and then forcing conversion on their subjects. The last major Norse pagan kingdom, Sweden, officially converted in the 11th century. The ancient Maya of Mesoamerica developed a complex religion intimately connected with their sophisticated astronomy and mathematics. The Maya cosmos consisted of multiple layers. The earth was a flat surface, possibly the back of a cosmic crocodile floating in a primordial sea. 13 layers of heaven rose above the earth, while 9 layers of the underworld, Xibalba, extended below. The Maya worshipped numerous gods, often with overlapping and transforming identities. Itzamna was a creator god and patron of scribes. Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, was associated with wind and learning. Cheik was the rain god, essential in a civilization dependent on agriculture. Puch was the god of death, depicted as a skeleton or corpse. Maya kings served as intermediaries between humans and gods. They performed bloodletting rituals, piercing their tongues, genitals, or other body parts, letting blood fall on paper that would then be burned, sending prayers to the gods through smoke. These auto-sacrificial practices were considered essential for maintaining cosmic order. Human sacrifice occurred in Maya civilization, though perhaps not as extensively as among the later Aztecs. Captives from warfare might be sacrificed, and ballgame losers were sometimes killed, though scholars debate how regularly this occurred. The Maya built magnificent temple pyramids aligned with astronomical events. At Chichen Itza, during the spring and fall equinoxes, the setting sun creates the appearance of a serpent descending the stairs of El Castillo Pyramid, representing Kukulkan. The Maya developed a complex calendar system, including a 260-day sacred calendar and a 365-day solar calendar that meshed together in a 52-year cycle. They also used a long count calendar tracking days from a mythological creation date in 3114 BCE. Maya religion survived the collapse of classic Maya civilization around 900 CE. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they found thriving Maya city-states with continuing religious traditions. Spanish friars, particularly Diego de Landa, burned Maya books, considering them works of the devil. Only 4 Maya codices survived, though many inscriptions on stone monuments preserve texts. Despite centuries of Spanish colonialism and forced Christianization, Maya religion survived in modified forms. Contemporary Maya people often practice a syncretistic religion combining Catholicism with traditional beliefs. Ancient sacred sites remain pilgrimage destinations, and traditional prayers and ceremonies continue. The Inca of South America created the largest pre-Columbian empire in the Americas, stretching along the Pacific coast from modern Colombia to Chile. Inca religion centered on the worship of Inti, the sun god, from whom the Inca emperor, the Sapa Inca, claimed descent. The Sapa Inca was considered divine, the son of the sun, and intermediary between gods and humans. His word was law, and every aspect of the vast empire reflected cosmic and religious order. When the Sapa Inca died, his body was mummified and preserved, continuing to own property and participate in ceremonies. Viracocha was the creator deity, said to have risen from Lake Titicaca, creating the sun, moon, stars, and humanity. After organizing the world, he wandered as a beggar, teaching civilization before disappearing across the Pacific Ocean. Some saw parallels between Viracocha myths and Jesus, though these connections are questionable. Pachamama, Mother Earth, was a fertility goddess receiving offerings before planting and harvest. Ilapa was the weather deity controlling rain, thunder, and lightning. The Inca saw the cosmos as alive, with mountains, rivers, and stones having spiritual essence. Sacred places, called huacas, dotted the landscape. These might be mountains, springs, caves, or unusual rock formations. The most important was the Coricancha, the sun temple in Cusco, the capital, whose walls were covered in gold and silver, and whose garden contained sculptures of plants and animals in precious metals. The Inca practiced capacocha, a form of human sacrifice in which children, considered pure, were taken to mountain summits and ritually killed to honor the gods and secure prosperity. Archaeologists have found remarkably preserved capacocha mummies in the high Andes, providing evidence of these practices. The Spanish conquest, beginning in 1532, devastated Inca civilization. Diseases to which indigenous people had no immunity killed the vast majority of the population. The Spanish destroyed temples, melted down religious artworks for their precious metal, and worked to replace Inca religion with Christianity. However, Inca religious concepts persisted. Pachamama remains an important figure in Andean religion today. Traditional ceremonies continue, often syncretized with Catholic practices. The mummified bodies of Inca rulers were destroyed by the Spanish. but the tradition of honouring ancestors remains strong. The ancient Hebrews developed a monotheistic tradition that became Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, profoundly shaping human history. While we cannot fully explore these traditions here, as they extend beyond our ancient period, their origins deserve mention. Early Hebrew religion, as reflected in the oldest parts of the Hebrew Bible, may not have been strictly monotheistic. The first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me," suggests the existence of other gods, even if the Hebrews were not to worship them. The divine council, mentioned in various biblical passages, contained other divine beings. Over time, Hebrew religion evolved towards strict monotheism, the belief that only one God exists. This God, YHWH, was the creator of the universe, the liberator of Israel from Egypt, and the giver of the law. Unlike the gods of neighbouring peoples, YHWH could not be represented in images. The temple in Jerusalem contained no statue in its Holy of Holies, only the Ark of the Covenant containing the tablets of the law. The Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE was a crisis that profoundly shaped Judaism. How could God have allowed Jerusalem and the temple to be destroyed? The prophets interpreted the catastrophe as punishment for Israel's unfaithfulness, but they also promised restoration. This experience deepened theological reflection on sin, justice, suffering, and redemption. The return from exile and the rebuilding of the temple marked a new phase. Judaism became centered on the Torah, the law given through Moses, studied and interpreted by scribes. The synagogue developed as a place for prayer and study. After the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in 70 CE, Judaism had to survive without temple sacrifice, evolving into the rabbinic Judaism that continues today. Chapter 8. The Legacy of Ancient Faiths. As we have journeyed through the spiritual landscapes of ancient civilizations, certain patterns and themes emerge. Despite vast differences in specific beliefs and practices, humanity across cultures has consistently developed systems to understand the cosmos, explain suffering, provide moral frameworks, and offer hope beyond death. The anthropologist Clifford Geertz defined religion as a system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, pervasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence. Ancient religions did precisely this. They provided frameworks for understanding reality, from the grandest cosmic questions to the most mundane daily activities. The diversity of ancient religions challenges any simplistic evolutionary model of religious development. The sophisticated monotheism or near monotheism found in later Vedic thought, Zoroastrianism, and Hebrew religion coexisted with complex polytheistic systems. Abstract philosophical theology in Greece and China developed alongside vivid mythologies. Mystery religions offering personal salvation emerged in civilizations with elaborate state cults. Yet we can identify certain common functions that ancient religions performed. They explained natural phenomena that science could not yet account for. Thunder, earthquakes, eclipses, and diseases were understood through divine action. While we now have natural explanations for these, we should not dismiss ancient people as naive. Their explanations were reasonable given their available knowledge. Ancient religions provided theodicies, explanations for why evil and suffering exist. The Mesopotamian flood myth depicted gods as capricious and humans as unfortunate victims. Greek myths showed gods bringing suffering through their conflicts and passions. Egyptian and Indian thought developed karma and judgment to provide moral explanations for suffering. Judaism and Zoroastrianism saw suffering as divine punishment or as part of a cosmic struggle between good and evil. Social order was reinforced through religion. The mandate of heaven in China, divine kingship in Egypt, the caste system in India, and patron deities of cities throughout the ancient world all connected social hierarchy with cosmic order. This legitimized existing power structures, but also provided standards by which rulers could be judged. A king who failed to maintain Ma'at in Egypt, or who lost the mandate of heaven in China, had failed religiously as well as politically. Gender roles were shaped and justified through religious narratives. The creation of woman from man's body in Mesopotamian and biblical accounts, the dangerous sexuality of goddesses like Inanna and Aphrodite, the purity required of Vestal virgins, and the pollution associated with menstruation in various traditions all reinforced patriarchal structures. However, goddesses also provided female divine models, and women found religious roles as priestesses, prophets, and devotees. Ancient religions addressed the universal human confrontation with mortality. The Mesopotamian vision of a gloomy underworld offered little comfort, making earthly life and remembrance after death all the more important. Egyptian elaborate funerary practices reflected deep investment in continuing existence. Greek heroes achieved a kind of immortality through fame. Indian and Buddhist concepts of reincarnation made death a transition rather than an ending. Chinese ancestor worship maintained connection between living and dead. Ritual practice created community and rhythm. Festivals marked seasons and provided breaks from labour. Pilgrimages connected dispersed populations. Sacrifices and offerings created reciprocal relationships between humans and gods. Initiation rites marked life transitions. These practices created shared experiences and collective identities. Ancient religions were generally polytheistic and inclusive. Gods could be added to pantheons, foreign deities identified with local ones, and multiple truth claims could coexist. This changed with the development of exclusive monotheistic traditions that claimed sole truth and demanded sole allegiance. The transition from ancient polytheistic religions to Christianity and Islam in the West, and the survival of Hinduism while Buddhism declined in India, involved complex historical processes. Christianity's claim to universal truth rather than ethnic or local identity, its emphasis on personal salvation through faith, its promise of resurrection and eternal life, and eventually its adoption as the Roman state religion all contributed to its spread. Islam's rapid expansion combined military conquest with a clear, uncompromising monotheism, a comprehensive legal system, and powerful claims about final revelation. Both Christianity and Islam absorbed elements from the religions they displaced while declaring those religions false. Yet the influence of ancient faiths persisted in subtle and not so subtle ways. Christian saints functioned somewhat like polytheistic deities, each with specific domains and feast days. The Virgin Mary took on aspects of earlier goddesses. Christian holidays aligned with pagan festivals. Folk practices continued under Christian veneers. Philosophically, Christianity and Islam engaged deeply with Greek thought. Christian theology developed through concepts from Plato and Aristotle. Islamic philosophy created sophisticated syntheses of Quranic revelation and Greek rationalism. The Hindu philosophical traditions continued evolving, engaging with Islamic and later Christian thought while maintaining continuity with Vedic roots. In art and literature, ancient myths remained foundational. The Renaissance saw renewed interest in Greco-Roman culture. Artists depicted scenes from classical mythology alongside biblical stories. Writers drew on ancient literary forms and themes. Even as Christianity dominated, the classical heritage was never fully abandoned. The scientific revolution and Enlightenment brought new challenges to religious authority, but also drew on ancient precedents. Pre-Socratic philosophers seeking natural explanations, Aristotelian emphasis on observation and logic, and mathematical approaches from various ancient civilizations all contributed to modern science. The Romantic movement brought renewed appreciation for ancient religion as expressing profound truths through myth and symbol rather than literal fact. Thinkers like Herder, Schelling, and later Jung saw ancient myths as expressing psychological and spiritual truths that transcended their specific cultural contexts. Modern psychology, particularly depth psychology, drew heavily on ancient mythology. Freud's Oedipus complex referenced Greek tragedy. Jung's archetypes were illustrated through comparative mythology. Joseph Campbell's hero's journey synthesized myths from cultures worldwide into a common pattern. The 20th century saw both new religious movements drawing on ancient traditions and serious academic study of ancient religions through archaeology, anthropology, and textual analysis. Neo-paganism, Wicca, and other movements attempted to reconstruct or reinvent pre-Christian European religions. Hinduism and Buddhism spread significantly in the West, bringing Asian religious concepts to new audiences. Today, ancient religions influence us in myriad ways. Our calendar preserves Roman gods in months and days. Legal concepts about justice and natural law have ancient religious roots. Ideas about the soul, morality, and cosmic order that pervade our culture developed in ancient contexts. The very concept of religion as a distinct sphere of life, though debated by scholars, emerged from ancient precedents. More fundamentally, ancient religions represent humanity's earliest sustained attempts to make meaning, to see patterns in chaos, to connect individual lives with something transcendent. In their myths, rituals, and beliefs, ancient people expressed hopes, fears, values, and insights that remain recognizable today because they reflect universal aspects of human experience. The gods may no longer be widely worshipped, the temples may lie in ruins, and the priests may be long dead, but the questions ancient religions addressed remain our questions. Why does the universe exist? What happens when we die? How should we live? What is sacred? In engaging with ancient faiths, we encounter our ancestors wrestling with these questions, and we recognize ourselves in their struggles and their provisional answers. May your dreams be peaceful, your rest be deep, and your sleep be blessed. Good night,